on to a topic that was pretty popular in some of my older videos, but I deleted those videos. And what it covers is how to decock a double action revolver. Now, I had like 2 or 3 different videos on this in the past, ranging back to about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and it was a pretty popular video. And over the years, and maybe once a year, for a couple of years, I did a different video where I showed a little bit more in depth, or I gave a little bit more information. And last night I deleted my original video. And then I have another video that's about a year old. I also deleted that as well. And that video had not gotten any comments in probably 6 months. As soon as I deleted the original video, which was fairly popular, I started getting comments on that one. So obviously it was something that people were searching for, and they wanted to know how to decock a double action revolver. And on my original video, going through a lot of the comments, what the common scenario was that somebody would get a revolver that didn't really know a lot about the revolver, or let's say they would give their girlfriend or their wife a revolver because they thought that would be a better weapon for them, and the girlfriend or the wife would load it up and be at home messing with it and do this, cock the hammer, and then be like, uh-oh. And the common thought for a lot of people is that the only way to release that hammer is to fire the weapon, and that's not the case. So a lot of people got on there and said, hey, thank you so much for this video and everything. So I want to remake this video, and I not only want to show how to decock a revolver safely, but I also want to talk a little bit about why it's important for it to work the way that it does. Also, when I watch a lot of people shoot revolvers that are not revolver guys, virtually everyone does it wrong. And what they do, and I'm going to show this guns unloaded before I show you here, just to show you. What you often see is semi-auto guys that are out in the range. They can't shoot this well, so they're shooting single action, and then they cock it, and then they're like, well, I'm not going to take that shot, so they just do this, keeping their finger fully depressed to the rear. And when you keep your finger fully depressed to the rear, no matter what the double action revolver is, what's going to happen is the hammer is going to be allowed to come forward and hit the firing pin. And if you can see right here, coming right through the frame, that's what happens. Now, if you don't keep your finger fully pulled to the rear, what happens is that firing pin won't come through the frame, because there's a system that's blocking that. And there's 2 major systems that are used in revolvers when it comes to blocking that. And I'll explain that after I show you the proper way to decock a revolver. The proper way, simply put, is to remove your finger from the trigger. That way the safety system that's in here, whether it be what Smith & Wesson uses, which is called a hammer block, or if it's what Ruger, Taurus, and new Colts use, called the transfer bar, either system will make the hammer moving forward absolutely safe as long as you remove your finger from the trigger. So basically, to do that, what you want to do is grab the hammer spur with your thumb and then tap the trigger, and then completely remove your finger from that trigger, and then let it go forward. And the safest way to do that is to put your thumb in between the frame of the gun and the hammer, and then to do that process while your thumb is in there, because if you happen to accidentally slip the hammer spur out of your thumb, it won't matter because your thumb will block it. And then you can simply remove your finger and then bring it down. So the best way to do it is put your thumb in there, grab the hammer spur, tap it, remove your trigger finger completely, then let that hammer come down slowly. That's how you do it. Now I'm going to explain why that works that way. In a Smith & Wesson, historically they used the hammer block. And what that is, on a Smith & Wesson, is originally Smith & Wessons had firing pins on the hammer here. So at the bottom of the hammer, they had to have a piece of metal that comes up, and when your finger is not fully depressed to the rear, that piece of metal stays up. So if this type of situation happens, that piece of metal will block the hammer. That piece of metal called the hammer block. And the only way that that hammer block moves down and out of the way and allows room for the hammer to hit the firing pin is when your finger is fully pulled to the rear, it keeps it down out of the way. And old Smith & Wessons used that, and when the new Smith & Wessons came out with the firing pin inside of the frame, you can probably see it there, they retained that same system. There's no need to really change it. Exact same thing. However, Taurus, Ruger, and new Colts use a completely different system called the transfer bar. And what that is it's basically exactly the opposite. A transfer bar, unlike that piece of metal moving out of the way or keeping out of the way when you hold the trigger fully to the rear, the opposite happens where a piece of metal stays up and fills a void between the hammer and the firing pin. And when you let off the trigger, that piece of metal falls down, creating a void rather than a block. Overall, I think the hammer block is a better system because that piece of metal that's blocking only comes into play when you're hitting the back of this hammer spur or when you are doing this thing, removing your finger and letting the hammer fall. So that piece of metal, doesn't have to take on a lot of abuse. I mean, 99.9% of the time, that piece never comes into play unless it's blocking a negligent discharge. On the other hand, a transfer bar has to be impacted for every shot to fire. So you're putting a lot of force on a piece of metal. But simply put, it works fairly well if the metal's a good quality and it's really easy and cheap to do. So a lot of companies opt for that, to just simply put that transfer bar in there. It's just simply cheaper and easier and all that. As for the Smith & Wesson, it uses the old hammer block, which I think is a little bit better. So nonetheless, that right way to decock that revolver, just put your thumb in there, tap the trigger, remove your trigger finger, let the hammer down. And if you're one of those guys that are at the range and you're shooting single action and then you're going out to fire a shot and you just do this, you're doing it wrong. Someday you're going to get a negligent discharge if you let it down a little bit too hard or if it slips. Because you might go to do this and decock it and this is how you do it and then you're halfway cocked and then whoops, that could be enough force, boom. So if you remove your finger from it, the hammer block blocks it, or the transfer bar moves out of the way. So that's the right way to decock a double action revolver. Thought I'd share that again, simplify this process, simplify the information, and show it again. So share, comment, and like, and as always, thanks for watching.